Item 4 on the agenda is temporary works design briefs. The system is up and running at Ipswich Cord, and the feedback I've had from certainly Rob Kemp as designer is that there is both quality and value in the temporary works design briefs that are being produced. Don't forget that on every single site that we have, we need to appoint a temporary works coordinator. If you haven't already done it, it must be done, especially where you have any temporary works, and that can include shallow excavations and the simple access scaffolding, all the way up to bridge slides, heavy support scaffolding, deep excavations. I don't need to tell you what temporary works are. So, coming from that, the temporary works design brief is just a pro forma which has 12 sections in it, which do require people to sit down and go through it and think it through to complete them. Certainly the CRE needs to review that. Certainly the temporary works coordinator needs to review it, and the person who should instigate it is the person who is commissioning the temporary works design. That could be anybody from site end. It could be a works supervisor, it could be a site engineer, it could be a project manager, depending on the scale of the job and the number of staff involved on it. So, the temporary works design brief. Section 1 is a design statement. A simple, clear statement about what the design is required for. The example I'm using here is for a piling mat, or as we now should call them, a working platform for a piling rig to do some work adjacent to the railway. So the design statement briefly states that what the platform is for. It's for the size and type of sheet piles that are going to be used, and what type of piling rig is going to sit on the mat. It also tells you where the piling mat is going to be situated. The second item, which is important, is the duration of the loading. You're probably aware that for short-term loading conditions, permissible stresses and the like can be increased slightly. Equally, for long-term loadings, i.e. over 6 months, then temporary works may not be, the temporary works route of approval may not be applicable with Network Rail, i.e. it's not a Form C anymore, or Forms 2 and 3. It moves into a detailed design, which would be Forms 1, 2 and 3 in the new regime. Third item is the loading that the temporary works are required to support. This should include an estimate of the dead weight of any plant and equipment on there, and an allowance for live loading. Item 4 is soils information. It's expected that on most sites there will have been a site investigation done. That information, if it is applicable, should be forwarded with the design brief. If it's not, then it may be that you have to commission a new site investigation. That could take the form of plate bearing tests, or hand dug trial holes, or even exploratory trenches. It depends on the nature of the temporary works, but For any temporary works that are resting on existing ground, then there will need to be some form of check on the capacity of that ground to take the temporary loading. If, however, you're loading an existing structure or a new structure with temporary works, then there needs to be a sense check on the temporary works designs for that. Next item is staging requirements. It's quite possible that the temporary works are going to have to be done in a number of stages, certainly with deep excavations. Once you've excavated to the lowest level, the form of construction coming up may well be done in a series of stages. That needs to be highlighted on the brief so that the designer knows that he is going to be required to produce a staging diagram to go with it. Item 6 is a list of interfaces. So this is where the temporary works interface with other items like adjacent buildings. Party wall act, that's coming into more prominence now. We're doing work in and around London, and you need to be aware in round terms that if you're going to excavate within 3 metres of an existing foundation, there needs to be a formal notice given to the third party owner of that adjacent building. So items like that need to be considered. Also, interfaces with commercial organisations and the like, where you might be using somebody else's car park to stand a mobile crane to lift in a bridge or something of that nature. Access requirements. You need to be able to get the temporary works to the point of installation. There may be access restrictions on that, and hence the temporary works would need to be designed to be piece small, i.e. they can be carried in by hand. Certainly in the case of Putney, that's one of the real restrictions we've got there. We are having to carry everything in through the station entrance and down the staircases. So restrictions like that need to be covered on the design brief. Item 8 is timescales. That needs to be realistic. Please do not expect temporary works designs in general to be turned around in any less than 5 days. So if you issue a temporary works brief on a Friday with a request for it for the following Tuesday, then it's unlikely you're going to get the request met, unless it's very, very simple, or unless you've had a pre-agreement with the designer that he can commit the time to do that. Please be realistic with the requests on when you need temporary works, and also you need to take account of the approval process by Network Rail, so that we're giving them a sensible amount of time to review and temporary works designs. Item 9 is very important, a single source of communications. Ideally this should be the person who's produced the brief, together a name and a telephone number, so that the appointed designer, and don't forget the designs can be done outside Spencer. We don't do all the temporary works in-house. There are occasions when we go externally, so the designer needs to know the name and contact number of a person who can help him understanding what the brief is if there are any questions, and also a form of contact in actually getting the information to them. Item 10 is a list of relevant engineering documentation. So this will normally be a list of drawings outlining permanent works that are required to fit in or support temporary works, borehole information, or anything else that is specific to that temporary works design request. So that's items 10 and 11. Item 11 is specifically for the drawings. Item 10 is for it's entitled engineering documentation. And then finally, the design brief needs to be signed off by the CRE CEM, the temporary works coordinator, and it needs to be ultimately signed off as accepted by the designer. Hence the designer can't sign it off until he's actually gone through it and understood it. But at the point at which the design is started, there should be some acknowledgement from the designer that he's happy with the brief and can proceed. So that is the pro forma. I can't think of any situation where we would not use that. It is a discipline. On the smaller sites, it can be a problem in terms of having personnel to do it. But all I would say is that if you are struggling with it, struggling in getting the briefs produced, struggling in understanding what information needs to go on in them, and generally with the concept of temporary works design briefs, then please contact, in the first instance, your CRE. If you are the CRE and you don't understand it, then you need to talk it through with the CEM. And if the CEM or CRE don't understand it, then they need to talk to me as rail engineering manager. So there is an upward change of help for you. It's just not acceptable not to do anything, I have to say, in this day and age. So even if it's in the slightly too difficult to do box, I'm afraid you're going to have to get on and do it. If you haven't done it for designs that you've already commissioned and you've got the answers, then I suggest to you that you need to look at it from the point of view of compliance with the CDM requirements and whether or not you would pass an audit by the HSE if they're asking you to prove evidence of a design brief for temporary works. Okay, that's the pro forma. The process is that in normal course of events, a temporary works designer will have been allocated to the project, and of course you can liaise directly with the temporary works designer. If you haven't got that facility, then the temporary works design request with the accompanying design brief needs to go to Ian Hall. Ian acts as engineering manager for the design team, and he interfaces with the procurement team when we need to go outside the company to engage temporary work services. Hopefully the issue of temporary works will have been identified at the startup stage of a project, and hence when procurement of design services is being considered, that who is doing the temporary works can be identified as well. The one area where we probably will not do our own temporary works design is where we've got scaffolding. That will usually go to an appointed scaffolding company, but the process of providing a design brief is still exactly the same. We should not be commissioning any scaffold designs without a design brief having been completed. And the usual issue you get with scaffolding designs is that the interface between the scaffolding and the ground it's supported on is usually an area where the scaffolding design company can't actually do the design or choose not to. So there's always an interface there. On the larger jobs, there will be a requirement to identify the temporary works up front in the form of a schedule, and hence it becomes a tracker, so that on a weekly basis the tracker can be updated and reviewed, so the submission of the temporary works does not get forgotten, and it does not become a problem when you want to start installing them, or whether you want to open up for public use, as in the case of footbridges and temporary staircases. So please give temporary works designs the importance that it actually needs. Thank you.